Hi there. Thank you for joining me on this edition of Java with Otava. I hope you've had a chance to grab a cup of your favorite blend. Today, I'd like to talk a little about 4 key questions to ask before you consider either deploying or quite possibly for many out there, redeploying a remote access solution. First, an introduction. My name is Jeremy Bigler, and I'm the Director of Product Management here at Otava. I've managed a few desktop and application virtualization practices in past lives, and I'm excited to discuss planning a sustainable remote access strategy. That said, let's dive in. The first question here appears at first glance to be, well, rather obvious, right? But let's consider who the user is in terms of their organization identity. Are they a full-time employee, part-time or temporary resource? Perhaps a third-party contractor? What's their role within the organization? What's required of that role? Should they have any time of day or geographic, called geofencing, restrictions? These types of questions give us pause to think about defining specific access policies based on a user's role within that organization. It also cues up the next question. What type of access should they have? Incidentally, one of the biggest security risks we've seen during the initial COVID-19 outbreak was widespread open VPN usage. This essentially opens a wide open front door into your network and allows users to access almost anything as if they were on the physical LAN or WAN. Now, while this may be appropriate for some individuals, it's likely not appropriate for everyone and probably shouldn't be a core component of your long-term sustainable remote access policy. Now, when we think about the type of access, VPN, app virtualization, and similar, there's a number of considerations that we need to keep in mind. The obvious first, what's easiest to deploy and maintain? What's the level of encryption on the tunnel? And similar questions that I'm sure you've probably already considered. But there's a few more to think about though, such as what provides an audit trail of time of day access, information access, and similar behaviors. This is specifically important if you're in a compliance-mandated industry. Second, what provides the easiest way to enforce role-based access? We just talked about defining access policies based on the role of a user within the organization. Role-based access now becomes a critical model that far exceeds the capabilities we had with the legacy all-or-nothing model. Finally, what provides the least security exposure from non-employer-owned devices? We'll talk about device management here in a moment, but we have to assume that both company-owned and non-company-owned devices will likely be used by your remote workers. This is especially important considering the rampant spread of social engineering and malware attacks seeking to exploit a potentially unsecured remote worker population. A final obvious question we have to ask is, how do we know it's actually them? 2020 has seen a significant uptick in social engineering attacks, phishing, waterholing, pretexting, social media deception. The list is endless, right? Social engineering unfortunately targets the one vulnerability we can't patch or update ourselves. So ensure whatever remote access solution you put into place is backed by at least 2 or optimally multi-factor authentication. Ensure strong passwords policies exist that recycle passwords on a frequent basis. Conduct regular security training and assessment for your entire organization. Now, while these methods have been around for a while and certainly aren't foolproof, they do provide a significant level of deterrence. And deterrence is one of the most effective results of security practice today. Now, in the interest of time, let's move on to discuss application access. Now, once we've ensured we know the use cases and requirements of our users, oftentimes defined by the roles within the organization or business units, we now have to think about what should and shouldn't they be accessing. Now, often overlooked, the concept of what they shouldn't access is a key consideration. A significant percent of breaches of personal and company data have occurred because access to that information wasn't specifically prohibited by the security controls in place within the organization. Understanding use case for data and application access is usually defined at the department or similar organizational structure level, but exceptions may need to be made. It's important from a security perspective, though, to ensure that you clearly identify required tools and data for each role or user identity, and then limit access to everything else. Now, while exceptions, of course, can be made, as mentioned, those should also be documented as part of an exception process. Finally, ensure your data access has appropriate controls inherent to the platform. Can users print remote data? Can they save the data to a local device? Can they upload the data from the remote device back into the data center? Each of these questions pose security considerations that need to be discussed. As a general practice, given the proliferation of ransomware and other attacks as mentioned, it is always advisable to limit access insofar as is reasonably possible and manage exceptions through that documented exception process. One note I'll leave you with on this topic is it's very common for organizations to allow free data flow between endpoints and organizations' cloud or premises-based data center. Now, while this may be perceived as being the most efficient strategy for productivity, it is also by far the riskiest, since not only can data be taken from the organization, but malware can be introduced back into the data center. So I'm curious, how many devices do each of you use on a regular basis? Personally, I have 2 laptops, a desktop, several mobile devices here. In fact, the average domestic employee has 3.7 devices that they use on a regular basis to access information. Now, how often are these devices employer-owned and controlled? How many of these are hybrid, meaning you're partially reimbursed in exchange for limited control? And how many are entirely end-user controlled, their own personal devices or devices they're using in a shared public space? I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. Endpoint devices, particularly devices that have access into your network over things like a VPN, pose a very real threat to your security and control of data. So as you consider a remote access strategy, consider what devices your employees will be using and how secure or safe those devices are. Consider limiting device access to only devices you feel are appropriate. Consider publishing an acceptable use policy for remote use of company-owned equipment and partially reimbursed personal equipment. You may want to consider a landing pad or landing zone for devices seeking direct LAN or WAN access so that you can ensure those devices are healthy, malware-free, have proper security software that's patched and updated, and appropriate controls in place to ensure that you're actually allowing a safe and secure device to enter your network. Consider restricting full LAN or WAN access to any device that doesn't fit that policy. Another point of consideration is the type of connection over which your employees will connect. Bandwidth is certainly cheap these days, I think we'd all agree. And most domestic employees will enjoy high-speed broadband connections. From a continuity standpoint, however, keep in mind that such service is often best effort, meaning unlike commercial-grade connections, there isn't an SLA for uptime or for service restoration. Now, this can certainly impact employee productivity and extended downtime. So consider building into your remote access strategy either compensation for backup connectivity, Wi-Fi from a mobile device or maybe a company-provided Wi-Fi hotspot, or additional security controls in the event employees need to use public hotspots such as a Starbucks. Lastly, let's consider where the user will be located. Now, not because you want to ensure proper user experience over RDP or VPN, although I'm sure you do, but really from a compliance standpoint. While domestic U.S. organizations have a limited exposure here, multinational companies face a variety of data protection, privacy, and similar legislative controls based on both country of origin and destination. Ensure you fully researched local compliance requirements and include appropriate end-user access controls based on those requirements in your access strategy. Now, with these guidelines, I'm confident you'll be able to put together a sustainable and appropriate access strategy that provides the optimal blend of remote enablement and corporate security. I hope you found these suggestions of value today, or at least thought-provoking. There's quite a bit more content here that we could have covered, and Otava remains committed to assisting you in any way we can. And we look forward to connecting with you soon. For more information, I'd invite you to visit our website shown here, and certainly take advantage of the other videos we've created in our YouTube channel as well. Enjoy your day and your coffee.